Hello, my name is Chris Parker, and in the next 27 minutes, you are going to learn a whole lot about GIMP and editing in GIMP for beginners. What are we going to cover? Everything is located right there, and the timestamps are in the description below. So if you're ready to get started, let's do it. All right, before we get into learning how to edit your images in GIMP, I want to share how to customize your GIMP interface, because if you take a look at my interface right now, it probably looks a lot different than yours. So we have our left panel here with our tools and some panels over here. And then on the right side, we have additional panels as well. You may have more panels than what I have right now. Plus, those right and left panels by themselves are probably not as wide as mine. So if you take a look at these little dots right here, right in the center, when you hover over it, your icon changes. And then when you click on it, you can drag it to the left or to the right to resize it. And of course, you can do the same for this side as well. The other thing you may have noticed is in the toolbox here, I have a lot of tools visible. And if you have the latest version of GIMP, then you probably have less tools visible. If you want to make all the tools visible, you can go up to Preferences, and then you want to expand Interface here, click on Toolbox, and then click on Use Tool Groups. And that's going to ungroup the tools, because by default, GIMP is grouping similar tools together. And you can now see right here that the tools have been grouped. If I click here, it will then ungroup it. So you can set that up based on your own personal preference. It's just going to take a second for GIMP to update with the option that you chose. So I like to have mine grouped together. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on. Once I click OK, we can see everything is grouped together. When you right click on one of these icons, you will see the tools in that specific group. So these three tools are very similar to each other. That's why they're grouped together. Now, when it comes to individual panels, I have my layers and channels here. You probably have another panel here called Paths. And then up here, you probably have some other ones as well if you haven't closed them previously. So let me show you how to rearrange these panels so you can set up the interface based on your own personal preference. If you click right here, you're going to see a bunch of options. You can click right here to close that tab or detach it, which will move it out of that panel, and then you'll have a floating window like I have here. To put it back, all I have to do is click and drag it up, and it's actually going to put it next to the channels panel right now. If I click and drag up, and if I get that blue line, that lets me know that it's going to be separate from these two down here. Now that I've done that, I can't really see all the brushes unless I scroll through right here. But if you take a close look right here, we have three more dots that lets you know that you can click and drag that down to move that panel or those panels so you can see the other panels above it. So my computer system's a little slow right now, so it's taking a little while for it to update. So now that it's updated, we can definitely see all those brushes now. I'm going to go ahead and close this particular tab because I don't need my brushes right now, and I don't even need my channels at the moment. Now, one last thing I want to point out is if you have three separate windows instead of one interface like this, that could be due to having this option right here turned off, which is single window mode. If I click on this, you'll notice, actually I need to make this one smaller, I now have three different panels. So if you have this, go up to Windows and click on single window mode to put them all back together. All right, I now want to show you how to resize or scale your image larger or smaller in GIMP. I'm going to go ahead and open up a PSD file, which is a Photoshop file format, but you can still open PSD files in GIMP. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this one here, and it's going to take a second to open because it's really large. It's 1.3 gigabytes in size, and that's because there's 50, 60 or more layers in this file alone. So you can see right here, there's a lot of layers, and there's a lot of grouped layers as well. They're mostly grouped layers, I should say. That's why this file is so large. So let's take a closer look at this image itself. And I want to point out a couple other things about layers in GIMP that's slightly different from Photoshop in case you're coming from Photoshop. One of the first things you're going to notice here, besides the photo itself, is we have this dashed line down the middle and this yellow rectangle. So what are those? Well, this first one, the blue line here, is a guide. You can add guides to help you out, guide your layers so you can align them where you want them. And I simply just click on the ruler here and drag it down or left or right to add them. I can also click on the guide to remove it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these guides here because we no longer need them. Now, if you're not able to remove that guide, because maybe it's picking a different layer, I'll explain what you need to do to fix that in just a second. So this yellow dashed line here, this rectangle, is known as the layer boundary in GIMP. So it contains pixels within it. Outside of that dashed line, there are no pixels. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here with my zoom tool here. And if I turn off the layer that is currently selected, which is this one right here, layer 27, if I turn that off, boom, you notice something different about the image. It's been retouched with this particular layer. So I like to place my edits of removing blemishes like this on a separate layer. That way I have control over that layer later on. Maybe I took too much detail out of that edit. I can drop the opacity to bring back some of that underlying detail from the layer below by lowering the opacity. Now I'm happy with the edit. I'm okay with it. It's fine. And my daughter's probably not going to be happy that I'm showing you all her blemishes, but I just wanted to show you that that's how I like to edit, on a separate layer. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because if I click on this layer with my move tool, I can move it, and you can see the layer boundary goes with it. Now, if I want to move all the layers together, I can click on the grouped layer to select it, but when I click on it, it's only going to move the layer that I selected. I'm going to undo that again with Command or Control plus the letter Z. Now, if we go into the tool options, when you have the move tool selected, you want to ensure you have move the active layer selected. And if you look at the one that was selected by default, pick a layer or guide. Well, if I add that guide back and try and move it, it's not going to select that guide. So anytime you're not moving what you want to move, make sure you have the tool options set up according to what you want to do. And now when I click on this image, it's moving all the layers inside of this grouped layer together. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Let me show you how to scale an image larger or smaller. Let's go ahead and move this guide out of the way. Actually, there's one more thing I want to show you, and that is this layer boundary right here. So we can see that there's pixels, or there should be pixels, inside of this blue layer boundary. Now, the reason why it's blue is because I have the grouped layer selected. If I come down here and click on this layer, it turns to yellow. So yellow is individual layers, blue is grouped layers. But the thing I want to point out is there's more to this picture than meets the eye, because, like I mentioned, the pixels are within this layer boundary, but the layer boundary is larger than the canvas. So this lets you know there's more to the image than meets the eye. If I grab my move tool here, I'm going to go ahead and select the grouped layer again. I can then move this around the canvas here, and you can see there's more to the picture. So if I want to recompose the image, and I know there's more pixels inside of that layer boundary, then I can readjust the composition to my liking. Now, the other thing I may want to do is resize the image larger or smaller to adjust the composition that way versus moving it around. So again, you want to make sure you have the correct layer or grouped layer selected so that everything gets resized. Now, to resize it, you're going to use what is known as the scale tool, which you can find up here under tools and transform tools. But in your toolbox here, we have our transform tools right here, which is right here. And if I right click on it, you'll see all the transform tools available. And again, these are all grouped together based on similar types of tools. So the transform tools will allow you to rotate, resize larger or smaller. You can flip the canvas horizontally or vertically, and there's a lot more options. So the scale tool, real easy to use. We also have keyboard shortcuts here as well. We have Shift plus S to activate it. If I grab it from the toolbox like so, I need to click on the image to activate it. If I hit the escape key, I get out of it. So if I use the keyboard shortcut this time, Shift plus S, it automatically applies that tool to that grouped layer that is selected. Then to resize it, you can either type in the width and the height you need here if you need a specific size, Otherwise, you can just grab a side or a corner to make it larger or smaller. If I click in the center here, I can then reposition that image according to what I need. Once I click enter or return, it will then resize it. If you need to move it, again, just go ahead and grab your move tool, and then you can move that into position for the composition that you want. All right, we've covered a lot about editing in GIMP, and we have a lot more to cover, but real quick, if you want to master editing in GIMP faster, I have a GIMP Made Easy for Beginners class. It's over 25 hours long, and it covers everything about editing in GIMP and a whole lot more. You can get it for up to 80% off by finding the link in the description below, so go ahead and check that out. All right, I now want to share an advanced editing technique that you can use to enhance your portraits, but we're going to slow it down a little bit so I can help you completely understand how this tool works. And we're going to concentrate the edit directly on the eyes. We're going to enhance the eyes, and then you can apply this technique to other parts of the image. So let me show you the original image straight out of camera, which is right here. No editing has been done to this image. We can see that in this image, the eyes are darker than the final edit that I did. And you may also notice that in this image, the lighting is flat. But in the final edit, it's brighter and there's more depth in her facial features. And that's all based on this technique that I'm going to share with you. Now, I'm going to give you the basics by applying it to the eyes. And then you're going to apply that knowledge to other parts of your portraits, and you have to practice. This is not something you're going to learn right away. So let me show you how I did this. So the first thing we want to do is we want to grab that original layer that we're going to use and duplicate it so we can apply the edits to a separate layer. That way you can work non-destructively. And if you apply the edit too much, save it and close that file, and you applied that edit to the original layer, then you can't make changes to it. But when you create a duplicate layer to work on and save the layers, you can then make adjustments to that layer or start over with the original layer. So I like to work non-destructively. All right, so to do that, we're going to come down here. We're going to click on this icon right here to duplicate the layer. Then I'm going to double click right here so I can call this eye enhance. This way I know what type of edits or what I'm trying to achieve with this particular layer, because if I have multiple layers here, I want to know what types of edits were applied to it. So we're editing or enhancing the eyes. All right, so what I want to do is I want to use our dodge and burn tool, which simply means I'm going to make parts of the image brighter or darker depending on the tool selected for the job. So if we come over here to our toolbox and right click right here, the smudge tool is selected by default. If you scroll down here, you'll see dodge and burn, and the keyboard shortcut for that is Shift+D. Once I click on that, the tool options will update with the different options I have available for this tool. Now, by default, the exposure is set to 50. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to 50. We'll come back to that in just a second. The type of tool that you want to use is either the dodge or burn. Dodge is selected by default. So dodge means you're going to make parts of the image brighter. Burn, kind of like a sunburn, you're going to make that part of the image darker. And what do I mean by that part of the image? Well, the tool itself is like a brush. So you're going to brush on the edit exactly where you want it. You also want to be aware of the range or the tonal range that you're targeting in your image. Now, if you're not familiar with the tonal range of an image, that's basically your shadows, midtones, and highlights. Now, I have a video tutorial on tonal ranges. It's like 4 or 5 minutes. So it's a real quick video, but I highly recommend that you watch that video tutorial to learn more about the tonal range, because once you understand the tonal range that's being captured by your camera, it's going to make it easier to understand how to use the dodge and burn tool and other tools that are targeting the different tonal ranges. I'll put a link to that in the description below. So for this particular edit, I'm going to target the midtones. So I don't necessarily want to target the darker parts of the image, which are the shadows, or the brighter part, which are the highlights. Midtones are neutral or in the middle range. So I'm going to target the midtones, and the exposure is going to be adjusted based on how intense of an edit you want to apply. So what do I mean by that? Well, 50 is the default. It's in between, right? So if we increase the exposure, the edit is going to be more intense, or in this case with the dodge tool, it's going to be brighter. If I drop it down to 17, then it's not going to be as intense. It's going to be darker or not apply that brightness level as much as a higher number. So there's no magic number. You have to practice with this to determine which exposure you want to apply to a particular image, and it's going to change from one image to another. So the settings I'm using now, you are not going to be able to use on your image because the brightness levels in your image are different than this one. So again, it's going to take time and practice to determine what part or what exposure setting to set based on the edit that you're working on. You may need to undo it and reapply it at a different level depending on the results you're getting. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the exposure down here to right around 42. I've already done this edit, so I kind of know where to apply it for this one. I'm going to go ahead and grab my zoom tool here, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom into these eyes. Now, the other thing you'll notice is one eye is brighter than the other. I don't want that, so I'm going to need to adjust the exposure for the other eye. So I'm going to grab my dodge tool again with Shift plus D, and then I can begin painting inside to make it brighter. How cool is that? I love it. All right, let's take a look at the before and after. So it's much brighter than it was before. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to drop my exposure down even more to right around 30 so that I do brighten it, but not as much as the other one, so that they are matching in brightness, or at least as close as possible. All right, so we've definitely enhanced the eyes, but I think we can make those eyes pop even more by adding a little bit of contrast to them so that the details in the eyes pop out even more. The eyes are the most important part of portraits, in my opinion, because the eyes are the gateway to the soul. At least that's what I've heard. So let's go ahead and enhance these eyes a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some contrast to make those details pop a little bit more. Now for this, it's another advanced technique, but I think it's a very important tool to learn how to use, and that is the tone curve. It's real easy to use once you understand its purpose and how to use it. So I'm going to go up to colors and select curves. So this gives me this new dialog window right here. We have our histogram in the back. We have this linear line, and we adjust this linear line to target the different tonal ranges in our image. So we have our shadows, midtones, and our highlights here. And by applying a specific type of edit or tone curve, we can add contrast to the highlights and shadows, and it's going to make those colors and details much more vibrant and pop more so than they are without that contrast adjustment. So how do you do it? Well, all you have to do is click and drag up. So we can see that the image is getting brighter, and I'm applying this edit in the highlights. So the highlights are getting brighter. If I click and drag down here, then the image gets darker, but more so in the shadows than any other part of the image. So I may want to increase or decrease this based on how much contrast I want to apply. So I may want to go a little bit more to make those eyes pop just a little bit more. Now, when I click OK, that edit is applied. Here's the before and after. The only problem is that edit, that contrast adjustment, was applied to the entire image, but I want to target just the eyes. So how do I do that? Well, I have to use another advanced technique known as layer mask. Again, real easy to use once you understand the concept behind it. So let's go over that real quick. To add a layer mask, we're going to click on this little clown icon, and then we have some different options here for the type of layer mask. So a layer mask is basically going to give you more control over where an edit is placed. If I select black and click add, watch what happens. Boom, that edit is completely gone. So everything I just did is gone, but it's not gone forever, because I can come in here and right click and delete or disable this layer mask, and that edit is back. I'm gonna go ahead and undo that. So with the layer mask, you have black layer mask or a white layer mask. A black mask is going to remove your edit. A white layer mask, I'm gonna go ahead and undo that, is not going to do anything to that edit. It's actually going to bring it back. So as you can see, nothing happened. Now in this case, it's much easier to use a black layer mask to start with, since I have a smaller area I need to recover, or a smaller area where I want to apply that edit. So So I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool here with the letter P. And if I paint with white, it should add that edit back where I paint. So I'm going to go ahead and paint in this area here. And you can see that eye is getting much brighter based on where I'm painting it. So I'm going to go ahead and apply it over here as well. And now you can see that those eyes are much more intense or much brighter and more detailed than they were before that original image right here. So there's the before and the after. Now, the other thing you can do, remember, because this is on a separate layer, you can lower the intensity of that edit because maybe it's too intense for your personal preference, whatever you prefer as far as editing goes. I don't like to go too intense, otherwise it's going to look fake. I think I got it just about right, but I may want to drop that opacity down a little bit to tone it down. So again, make adjustments to your layer based on your own personal preference. All right, now that we've done some basic edits, I'm going to show you how to retouch your images, in particular for this image, how to remove blemishes. So what we need to do is we need to duplicate our layers again in order to work non-destructively. I'm going to duplicate this layer and this one as well because I want to merge those layers together because they have multiple edits to them. Although this original one here is just a duplicate, you want to do this when you have multiple layers with different edits on them because you can't apply your layer mask and have those edits carry over. So I'm going to go ahead and move this layer up by clicking on this icon here. I'm going to turn off all these layers right here because what I can do now is I can right click on this one and select merge visible layer, click merge again, and then those layers are merged together. So what I want to do is double click here and call this retouch 1. And what we need to do is we need to give GIMP a sampled area of the image to use those pixels, those colors, the texture, the contrast to blend in with the area that we want to retouch. And we can either do that with the clone tool or the heal tool. The clone tool is going to duplicate the pixels exactly. Heal is going to blend the pixels together to make it look much more natural. So I like to use the heal tool for retouching blemishes for that reason. So if we come over here, the clone tool is set by default. If we right click, we can then select our healing tool. You can also grab it with the letter H, and then you have your tool options here. So what I want to do is zoom in. Now, before I do that, this layer boundary right here kind of gets annoying once in a while. I don't necessarily want to see it all the time when I'm working. So you can actually turn that off. So to do that, we're going to go to View and select Show Layer Boundary to hide it. All right, let's go ahead and zoom in with our zoom tool here. Maybe one more. And I'm going to go back to my heal tool with the letter H. So what I want to do is I want to tell GIMP to sample specific pixels that are near the blemishes that I want to retouch. To do that, we need to hold down our Command or Control key, depending on if you're on a Mac or PC. And then once you click in an area, let's work on these blemishes right here. I'm going to click right here. So I'm left with this circle, and that lets us know where the pixels are going to be sampled from, and it tells GIMP where to sample them from. Now, when I paint over this blemish up here, boom, it disappears. How cool is that? So now I'm just going to go across right here. And when I move to a different part of the image where the pixels are different, I want to resample again. So Command or Control, click, and then paint in that area. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on making this perfect. I think you get the idea. I would spend a little bit more time on making this better, but you get the idea. So there's the before and the after. So that's one way of retouching. A quicker way that I prefer, which is the pro method, is to apply the retouching on a new layer. So I'm going to click right here to create a new layer. I'm going to call it Retouch 2. You want to make sure that the fill width is set to transparency. Click OK. And then in the tool options, when you have the healing tool selected, you want to come down here and click on Sample Merged. It's turned off by default. So make sure it looks like this, has that little X there. And what that's going to do is it's going to sample the pixels from the layer below it versus the layer that is selected. So now I'm going to sample right here, Command or Control, click, and then I can paint over this area. I'm going to go ahead and do a few more real quick here. So I'm going to continue sampling new areas as I work on it. Again, this isn't perfect, but I think you get the idea. Maybe a few up here and we'll get some of those. Okay, I'm going to grab my move tool to deactivate that tool. And then when I turn off this layer, you're going to see that those blemishes are still on the layer below it, but the edits are being applied to this layer. How cool is that? I love it. This is the best way to edit your images or retouch your blemishes, because now I have control over that layer. I can adjust the opacity if I want to bring back some of the detail or the texture from the layer below. Maybe I want to apply a blending mode depending on the results that I want for that particular edit. All right, so once I'm done editing, which this image is not, I just want to quickly show you the final thing I do for retouching my image, and that is to sharpen the image. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this grouped layer here. I need to turn off this layer up here and turn this one off, and then I can go ahead and merge those visible layers. I'm going to go ahead and call this Sharpen, and let's turn that frame back on. All right, to sharpen the image, you're going to go up to Filters, Enhance, and select Sharpen, Unsharp, Mask here. And the default settings are pretty intense, at least for this image. I like to sharpen more for my landscape photos versus my portraits, because if you sharpen a portrait too much, it's going to be noticeable and look unnatural. So I'm going to drop the amount down a little bit, as well as the size or the radius of the pixels being sharpened. And it's going to be a subtle upgrade or a subtle sharpening to the image. There's the before and the after, kind of hard to see, but it's definitely sharper than it was before. Now that you have some basic knowledge of editing in GIMP, you've just touched the surface. So you have a lot more to learn about editing your images in GIMP, and to elevate your GIMP editing skills even further, check out one of these playlists.